It is officially the week of the NFL draft. So we are giving you guys our top 20 to 23 wide receiver rankings. We got some honorable mentions. We're going through this entire class. I don't believe we've even done this yet. So we're going to talk about every single guy. We'll spend a lot of time on the more depth names, less time on the, top 3 guys that we've been talking about for a long time. Should be a really, really fun exercise. We are going to be doing this for running backs tomorrow. We'll do it for quarterbacks and tight ends on Wednesday, and then we'll do a final NFL mock draft for you guys on Thursday. So should be a fun video. If this is the first time you're checking us out and you guys play Dynasty Fantasy Football, leave a subscribe down below, hit the like button, all that good stuff. But Danny, I'm fired up. How you doing?
Not too bad, not too bad. And like you said, it is NFL draft week. Come Thursday, man, you guys are going to see us enjoying, celebrating, streaming all throughout the draft. Day 1, day 2, and day 3. It's going to be a ton of fun. And I mean, obviously our own teams have, back end first round picks, kind of want to see what's available. But the intrigue is just what happens in the NFL draft. So a lot of the guys that we're going to be talking about today will hear their name called probably in the first 2 days of that draft.
Yeah, and our teams both could address this position, wide receiver, at the draft at some point. Probably your team earlier than mine, but for the most part, I think we could get some wide receivers early on. So without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, so as I talked about in the intro, we are going to talk about a couple honorable mentions here before we get into our actual top 20s, because we did have some guys that just missed the cut that are still like 3rd, 4th round caliber players. One of those guys is Johnny Wilson. Both of us actually have him just outside of our top 23 or top 20 wide receivers. You have him at 23. I have him at 22. Obviously, he's got some freakish size. He's a really good mover, honestly, for the 6'6", 231 pounds that he is. Had a 98th percentile speed score at the combine as well. I think he was pretty strong versus like press. He has great play strength in general, given his size. Also a fantastic run blocker, given that size as well. And I thought he had a pretty good feel for like zone coverage. The real issue, which keeps him outside of my top 20, is he's a complete body catcher. He doesn't have really natural hands at all. And I also think when he's route running, like he doesn't always sink his hips and throttle down. He's kind of running at full speed a lot of the time, and he's kind of limited in terms of an after the catch receiver. Plus, from a fantasy perspective, we know, age adjusted production and all that stuff factors in. And he is 23 years old, and he regressed as a senior once they got Keon Coleman in as a transfer. He actually was on pace and on a trajectory to potentially be a top 10 receiver in this class after his junior season at Florida State, but he kind of regressed this year.
Yeah, and obviously with Johnny Wilson, the first thing you're going to notice is the incredible size, 6'6", 231 pounds listed. And the main question that I have for him is, can he handle being a number 3 wide receiver? Can he handle the duties of being a full-time NFL wide receiver, or will he have to move inside to tight end? And obviously, that's the biggest question that you have. You see a guy with that type of size, you see that guy with, exceptional movement ability at that size, and automatically you think, okay, maybe he may be best aligned as a tight end. But even as a wide receiver, he's a solid player, honestly. Like, we're talking about that big style possession wide receiver in the mold of, if he hits that upper percentile, like a Marcus Colson of days past, that 6'5", 230 pound, let me catch it, 9 yards down the field, get a couple yards after the catch and get down, but you can pretty much rely on him. The problem with that projection for him is that one of the biggest weaknesses, like you said, happened to be with his hands. Like we saw guys like Marcus Colson, guys like Plaxico Burress, like they had big dependable mitts, whereas I can't really see the same thing for Johnny Wilson. Again, fine player, but I do view him as more so a day 3 type of guy.
Yeah, I have him kind of right on that fringe as well. I think I wouldn't have any problem with a team taking him at the end of the 3rd round, but early day 3 is the grade that I have on him as well. My comp for him, like you said, was a Plaxico Burress type. I do think he can stay at wide receiver. I don't think he needs to move to tight end, but like you said, 10.9% of his passes in 2023 were dropped. He doesn't have the greatest hands in the world. And also, I don't think his hands were an asset, especially when you consider the fact that this guy has a frame that's going to outduel any cornerback on the field. He should be winning at a high degree in terms of contested catches. And I noticed you have Allen Lazard as the comparison there, who also kind of struggles a little bit with drops as well. One of the other honorable mentions that we have in this tier is Jacob Cowing as well. A couple good, really good, honestly, sticking points with Jacob Cowing. I think he's very shifty. He was very productive in his, a couple years at UTEP, and then he transfers over to Arizona as a senior, I believe. He had 18.6 breakout age. He had 43.1% target share in 2021, his final year at UTEP. But he is very undersized. He's 5'8", 168 pounds. I believe at the Senior Bowl, he was even lighter than that. I think he was in the 150s. And then he's also like 23 years old. He's not very good in contested situations. The play strength, obviously a big concern there, but if you just need a number 3 slot receiver to win on short routes and be versatile, hand him the football, kind of like a Rondale Moore, that's kind of my comparison for him. Rondale Moore is a better athlete, but I actually think that Jacob Cowing is more refined as a short route runner and more refined as a receiver. So that's kind of what you're getting. You're sacrificing a little bit of the Rondale Moore athleticism for a little bit more versatility in terms of like a slot receiver.
AKA, you just described Wan'Dale Robinson, who is my comp for him.
Yeah, exactly. So Jacob Cowing and Johnny Wilson were 2 guys that ended up missing the cut for us in terms of our top 20 receivers. But Danny, I'll let you kick things off. We're going to go through wide receivers 20 to 16 for you and then for me, and then we'll kind of jump around between the names and talk about guys that we want to talk about here.
So you said list my 20 to 16 in order. Coming in at 20, we have Devontez Walker, wide receiver of the North Carolina Tar Heels. Number 19, we have Brenden Rice of the USC Trojans. Number 18, and I'm sure this is going to be a guy we both kind of, really, really hype up because we don't typically see him inside of anybody's top 20s, but Jalen Coker, wide receiver of Holy Cross. Number 17, Roman Wilson of my Michigan Wolverines. And then coming in at wide receiver 16, I have Jermaine Burton of the Alabama Crimson Tide.
Yeah, that's definitely a solid list. I mean, we're going to have some variation here. Like a couple of the guys that you mentioned are outside my top 20. Some of the guys that you mentioned are just inside of my top 15. Actually, one of the guys that you mentioned. So my 20 to 16 is Jermaine Burton, wide receiver from Alabama at 20. Roman Wilson, wide receiver from Michigan at 19. Tez Walker at 18 from North Carolina. Malachi Corley at 17 from Western Kentucky, and then Javon Baker at 16 from UCF. So let's start with some of the guys that I had outside my top 20. You had inside your top 20. Let's actually kick things off here with Brenden Rice because he came in for me at 21, I believe, or 22. So he was a guy that I found maybe not quite deserving enough to be inside my top 20.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, like the grades that I have in this range are relatively close. So for reference, my 19 and 20, Brenden Rice being my 19, like I said, Devontez Walker being my 20, both actually ended up with the same 72.5 grade. But what makes Brenden Rice so intriguing at the next level isn't exactly, we're going to be talking about Devontez Walker in a second. We're going to be talking about the movement ability, the size that he brings. Brenden Rice isn't exactly that type of player, but what Brenden Rice is, in my opinion, can be a polished number 3 wide receiver, outside boundary X that can contribute to an NFL offense on day one. And again, while I don't think he can be a top 15 receiver, top 20 wide receiver in the NFL, think of kind of the utility that Romeo Doubs has in that Packers core, where you have the yards after catch ability of Jaden Reed, you have the big time athleticism of Christian Watson, and you have that steady chain mover on the outside with Romeo Doubs. And for what it's worth, Romeo Doubs, decent second season in the NFL. I think if he ends up hitting his ceiling, when I'm talking about Brenden Rice, it could be in the mold of a guy like Corey Davis, where we saw in 2019, again, never operating as number 1, but as the number 2 to AJ Brown, Corey Davis was a very, very solid contributor in fantasy. Again, Brenden Rice, I'm not out here saying he's going to be a future wide receiver 1 in the NFL, but I really do feel like if you have a superstar number 1 wide receiver, he could end up being the 2 and maybe contribute, 900 to 1,000, 8 to 10 touchdowns in some of his best years.
Yeah, I would say that's a pretty bullish projection on Brenden Rice.
Sure.
I'm a little lower on him. I wrote in his fantasy outlook that he's the vanilla ice cream of this wide receiver class because he's a smart player. He's well-rounded. He's got good size, 6'2", 208 pounds, 78th percentile speed score, 51st percentile burst score. He kind of does everything at a solid level. I think he's a good, scramble drill type of wide receiver as well. Kind of goes into his football intelligence. Obviously, his dad is the best receiver in the history of the NFL with Jerry Rice. So I'm sure he learned a lot of the intricacies of the game from his father. But the downfield usage is something that I saw also flash on him. The only real cons I have with Brenden Rice is that he has kind of average explosiveness, average feet as a route runner. I think he needs some refinement there. Contested catch wise, I think for a guy that has a pretty decent size profile, I thought he should have been better in that area. And then his analytics profile. I mean, you were playing with Caleb Williams the last 2 years. And I get Jordan Addison was there and some of these other like maybe tertiary receivers that we see go in the draft, like a Taj Washington or somebody like that. But to be honest, I think he definitely this year especially should have been more productive with Caleb Williams and should have been more of a safety valve for him. And his numbers are kind of just like average across the board. The only thing that you can really point to is on a per target basis. He actually led this class with 0.75 EPA per target. But again, he's playing with Caleb Williams. So he has an advantage that not a lot of other wide receivers in this class have. So I like Brenden Rice, but I think a Romeo Doubs, Corey Davis, maybe even a Cedric Wilson is the type of comp that you're looking at here.
Which, when you're talking about the wide receiver 20 in any class, just kind of goes to show you how stacked this class is at the top, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it speaks to the fact that he's barely a early day 3 grade for me, and he's like my 23rd receiver in the class in terms of my overall grade. I said 21, 22 before. He actually is 23 for me, and like you said, he snuck inside your top 20. So my guy that I have in my top 20 that you don't have in your top 20 is Malachi Corley, wide receiver from Western Kentucky, a guy that is extremely, extremely scheme dependent. I think that's mainly the reason why you have him outside of your top 20. I'm kind of projecting like favorably what happens to Corley if he does go to the right situation, because my comp for him is kind of like Laviska Shenault. And that will probably scare a lot of dynasty players off, because Laviska Shenault notoriously was a very good prospect, an analytics darling, a guy that you had to draft in the early second round of 2020 rookie drafts, because Malachi Corley does everything the same that Laviska Shenault did coming out of Colorado. He's exceptional in space, great yards after catch ability. He's tough. He's a great athlete. He's productive, and he's got good size. The problem with Malachi Corley is like 50% of his catches came on screen passes, and he doesn't really have any route running chops whatsoever. His design touch roll, low ADOT, kind of situation is a red flag from a fantasy perspective, because a lot of these players come out of college where they're clearly the best guy on their offense. Their quarterback can't hit the broad side of the barn, and their team just finds any reason possible to get the ball in their hands. And the downfield work is not there for Corley. Maybe he can develop that, but 42.6% of his targets coming on screens is concerning.
Yeah, and I agree. And that was the big reason why I have Malachi Corley slightly missing out of my top 20. For reference, I mentioned with Brenden Rice, he had a 72.5 grade. Malachi Corley was not far behind. He ended up as a 75 for me, a 70.5. When you see Malachi Corley, the way I see him working out in the next level, and again, people are going to throw the Debo comps. People are going to throw the A.J. Brown comps, because it's like, oh, a compact receiver that makes his hay after the catch. He is not the technician that either of those guys are. And again, I'm not saying Deebo Samuel is a great round runner at the next level, but Malachi Corley, even getting to Deebo Samuel level, I think is a projection. And like you said, you have to play favorably when it comes to scheme. Can I see a world where post NFL draft, he lands on the right scheme where he can be considered as a top 15 receiver, especially for fantasy purposes? Absolutely. It's just, I have to be able to trust the team that drafts him with putting him in these right positions, because I genuinely do not think he is a developed receiver at this point. He's almost the anti-Brenden Rice, where I feel comfortable in the projection with Brenden Rice being a number 2, number 3 receiver at the next level, not really having concerns about his translatability. Malachi Corley, I think, has all the upside in the world. It's the only problem that I have. Can he run routes at an NFL level? Because the way he was used in college would not indicate so.
Yeah, exactly. He's just the type of player that we get fooled by in the dynasty community. He's not the type of guy that we want to usually be drafting, because his profile is a bit of a fugazi, looking at, how much he was targeted and how much he was able to do after the catch. It's like, it's pretty easy to do that when your ADOT is like 5 yards or whatever it was. Like, it wasn't very high down the field, but 8.6 yards after catch per reception. Like I said, he's physical, he's tough. Maybe he can develop into a full-fledged alpha wide receiver, or maybe even just a wide receiver 2 or a productive slot receiver at the next level, because he does have good size. He is very physical. He has good hands. He's great after the catch. It's just that short to intermediate route running is something that I have a real question mark with. But I do feel decent that he can develop this at the next level. And that's why I have him at 17. I did get a little bit higher on him after a second watch. And I do think, like, if you dropped him into the Houston Texans offense, they probably won't draft a receiver now that they have Stephon Diggs, but that type of Matt LaFleur, Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan scheme, the Los Angeles Rams make a lot of sense potentially as a scheme that would be able to deploy him pretty well.
Miami day 2.
Malachi, yeah, exactly. Malachi Corley is an interesting player, but he does have warts to his game, and that's I can see why you have him outside your top 20. I'm kind of just projecting him a little bit favorably here. So you mentioned Tez Walker was at 20 for you. We can actually break him down quickly here, because early on in the process, I feel like a lot of people were way higher on Tez Walker than they are right now, despite honestly, like, he ran really well at the combine, right? 4.36 at 6'2", 193 pounds, 98th percentile burst score. I mean, his RAS is 9.87. He's big and he's fast, and he had great downfield usage. He has strong hands, I would say, despite what he showed at the Senior Bowl with like all the drops that he had during the game. I think he's got good physicality, and I think he's a good zone beater as well. The problem I had with Tez Walker when I watched him was play to play, he was very inconsistent in general, but I also think he's a very linear athlete. I don't think he's got great lateral agility. And as a result, he wasn't able to separate versus press man coverage and regular man coverage on in breaking and out breaking routes. It was pretty much get this guy to run posts and, that kind of route tree. Only there's tons of other receivers in this class that do that better than him, like a Brian Thomas Jr., a Troy Franklin, somebody like that. And his profile is extremely wonky coming from Kent State over. He had, missed the first couple games of North Carolina's season this year. So all over the place in terms of a profile. But I do think he does one thing well, which is run downfield routes. And for that reason, he can be a field stretcher day one for an NFL team. And even though we're talking about a guy that I have graded as my wide receiver 18 and your wide receiver 20, I think he could be a number 3 receiver a la DJ Chark at the next level right away.
And let me read you off some measurables. So for Tez Walker, obviously he ends up measuring in at the combine 6'1", 193 pounds, 40.5-inch vert, 11.2 broad, with his 40-yard dash / speed metrics being 40-yard dash 4.36, 20-yard split 2.55, and 10-yard split 1.54. For reference, when you're talking about DJ Chark, which is literally my comp as well, 6'3", 199 pounds, 4.34 speed, 1.51 10-yard split, 2.54 20-yard split, 40-inch vert, and a 10.9 broad. Like, we're talking about athletically, stylistically, like bar for bar, word for word. They are almost identical. And we saw DJ Chark at the next level, like you said, very similar pros and cons that I see in Tez Walker's game, where winning at the third level is not the issue. He can get separation at the third level. Obviously, the height, the weight, the movement ability all works in his favor. And at times, he can show ability at the catch point. The problem that I have for him is that he can win on the third level. He's good at the catch point. Like, third level, I'm not worried about him at all projecting to the next level. But when you want to be a steady fantasy producer, you have to show the ability to work at the intermediate. You have to show the ability to work at the second level. And with Tez Walker, my main cons for him are as a route runner and as an after the catch player. Similar to DJ Chark. And we saw DJ Chark in his second year in Jacksonville have over 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns, look like he could potentially be even more. But ultimately, field stretchers may show, the ability to be something more. But if they don't develop their game, that's about the ceiling that you can expect. 70 catches, 1,000 to 1,100 yards, maybe 8 touchdowns in your best season. But we see this archetype every year, and we want to envision, given the athletic traits, that they could be something more. And while a guy like DJ Chark flashed that upside in his second season, we've kind of seen throughout his NFL career that he hasn't quite lived up to that expectation since that second season. And although I think Tez Walker on, a year or two in his NFL career may give you a lot of production, I don't necessarily envision him at the next level being a consistent 1,000-yard plus, 8+ touchdown type of receiver.
Yeah, he would probably have to go to like a really, really good landing spot for a team that needs, maybe the Chiefs want a Marquez Valdez-Scantling replacement in round 3, and that's when they start to address the wide receiver position. Again, I can see it. I think it would make sense. We see this profile all the time, like you said. Yeah. And people always project some super high mythological ceiling onto these types of players. When you watch the film, you realize that they kind of are what they are. And Tez Walker also is going to be 23 years old about a month after the draft, too. So he kind of has, I wouldn't say maxed out what he's going to do because he's still a young player. But at the same time, I feel less like if he was 20 years old and he had one real year of Power 5 football because he came from Kent State after his freshman and his sophomore year, I would feel better about projecting him forward than I do right now, where I think he kind of is what he is in terms of a field stretcher, potential number 3 wide receiver that, to me, in this loaded of a wide receiver class, doesn't get you much higher than a back end top 20 guy. I have him at 18. You have him at 20. So you mentioned another guy that we both have in our top 20s just at the end of it. I have Roman Wilson at 19. I believe you said, did you have him at 19 as well?
17.
So with Roman Wilson, obviously you're a Michigan Wolverines fan, so you're going to know probably a little bit more in terms about what his role was in the offense and stuff. My thing with Roman Wilson is the vertical slot archetype that we've seen over the past couple of years with a Marvin Mims last year, and Elijah Moore in 2021, and Jahan Dotson even in 2022. Normally, when we see these guys translate to the NFL, they can't create the amount of space that they were able to in college, especially when you think of even like Josh Downs last year. I think Roman Wilson is a touch worse than all of the prospects that I just named across the board. I think he's a worse route runner. I think he's got definitely a worse analytical profile than Downs and Elijah Moore and those type guys had. I think he's a good athlete. I mean, 62nd percentile speed score. He ran a 4.39 at the combine at 5'11", 185 pounds. Matt Harmon's reception perception charting data came out. People that say he's like a great route runner, I mean, he was like below the 20th percentile pretty much across the board. So what I see with Roman Wilson is that he's savvy, he's quick, and he's fast. He's a good downfield route runner, and I think he has good hands, and I think he's generally a well-rounded, like high floor type of projection at the NFL level. But I wouldn't spend more than like a third or a fourth round pick on this guy if I was an NFL team, because of the production profile, because of the fact that he's undersized, because of the fact that he doesn't always win in contested situations. And honestly, I seriously doubt that he's going to turn into a number 2 or a number 1 receiver someday. I think he's destined to be like Olamide Zaccheaus or something like that, where he's kind of like a number 3 receiver. My comp for him is Marvin Mims from last year. But honestly, the more I look at that comparison, Marvin Mims was more explosive and had a much better analytical profile.
Yeah, and I think that's fair concerns. I do think obviously the ceiling there would be like a Tyler Lockett. The thing with Tyler Lockett, though, is once he got to the NFL level, we saw the route running consistency. With Roman Wilson, he flashes good route running, but the problem, of course, the construct of the offense, not a lot of volume. Obviously, the reception perception data, he didn't do it consistently. And for, not an older player, but he's going to be 22. It's not like he's a 20-year-old player where you can say, hey, the flashes as a route runner, next year in college, we could potentially see him iron out his game. Like, he's still a relatively older player for what his kind of skill set provides. But what he does well is he's tough as nails. He catches the football and he can win down the field. Like, we saw that on multiple occasions at Michigan when Michigan needed a big play. Roman Wilson and Colson Loveland were the two guys making it down the field for JJ McCarthy. I would agree with you, though. Like, there's definitely warts in this profile. Again, thinking every one of these type of archetypes is going to end up being Tyler Lockett is how we end up at a loss in our rookie drafts. But I do think Roman Wilson can show more at the next level than he did at college at Michigan. I don't think he's going to be a number 1 in an NFL offense, but you put him on a contending team, he can start off as maybe the number 3, potentially working as the number 2. I think that's his best path to potentially being a very good contributor in fantasy. So I'd see the upside, but like you said, definitely more progression needed in order for him to be a consistent player in your fantasy lineups.
Yeah, the wide receiver prospect model that we have kind of shows that Roman Wilson's a little overvalued by the NFL draft community right now, because he's projected to go as a second rounder. And I think he will probably be selected in the second round of the NFL draft. And the prospect model shows that in terms of comparable prospects since 2016, he's on the level of like a Kiki QT or a Josh Reynolds or somebody like that, who are more like 3rd, 4th, 5th round type of guys. And that's kind of how I see Roman Wilson. I think that the second round buzz is simply a matter of the fact that he played for a national champion and the fact that he played at a huge school and that kind of thing. If he went to Arizona like Jacob Cowing, he'd probably be valued as like a 4th round wide receiver in terms of his NFL draft capital. So to me, I think people are going to see that he goes in round 2 and they're going to chase an early round 3 rookie draft pick in Roman Wilson. And to be honest, I'm probably letting my league mates draft him for the most part. So of your top 20 guys, who do you have left? I have Jermaine Burton and Javon Baker left. Are any of those guys in your top 20 or are they ahead of that?
So Javon Baker is ahead of that. The 2 guys I have left inside my 20 to 16 range. You mentioned Jermaine Burton coming in at 16. We could just talk about him right now, and then we can get into the last guys that we have.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about Jermaine Burton, because he's been really buzzy as a name.
Polarizing.
Lately. Very polarizing player. I am very much of the belief that all of the off-field concerns we've heard are true, because there's so much smoke around it, to the point that I don't think it's just, and he's not a good enough prospect for somebody to want him to like slide to them in the draft. Like if this was Malik Nabers we were talking about, I could see a team like generating those rumors so that they could like Malik Nabers would slide to them at like 13 or 15 or something like that. But for me with Jermaine Burton, there was some pros on film, like no doubt about it. I mean, he's got great speed, 91st percentile burst score, 4.45 40-yard dash at 6 foot, 196 pounds. He's not undersized. He's like the same size really as Malik Nabers is. So he has good speed. He has strong hands. He's explosive. He's got good downfield ability. He had a polarizing and challenging prospect profile to kind of work through. But I keep coming back to this, because you can blame Jalen Milroe for this season's production. But he had Bryce Young last year, and he had Stetson Bennett 2 years before that. So his production profile being as bad as it is, he was never really the number 1 or even number 2 receiver of his offense until this year, when Jalen Milroe was kind of holding him back. And he also has these off-field issues. He's going to be 23 years old about 2 months from now, too. The way I look at this type of prospect is maybe he can hit his upper range of outcomes and become a number 3 receiver, field stretcher at the NFL level. but I think this guy is probably destined to be not fantasy relevant outside of best ball formats. That's kind of the way I look at him.
Yeah, the comp that I had for him is like a Kenny Stills type, and it's funny because now I'm actually like looking at the physical comparison. Kenny Stills coming out of Oklahoma, 6 foot, 194 pounds, 4.38 40, 2.58 20-yard split, 1.54 10-yard split. When you're looking at Jermaine Burton, obviously coming out 6 foot, 196 pounds, 4.45 40, 2.59 split at the 20-yard, and 10-yard split of 1.53. So athletically, that is the comp I came for. And honestly, God, stylistically, they are very, very similar in my opinion. He's the guy that after watching a second time, I rose the most on. Initially, I had him, I believe, as my wide receiver 22 on the class. Didn't really think much of him. The production, the character concerns. I don't think I was giving him a fair shot. Once I replugged the tape in, I watched the Texas games, I watched the Texas A&M games, and I noticed that despite the box score not really glaring out specifically in the Texas game, he was open a hell of a lot more than I would have expected. You see the box score and you think, okay, I think he went like 2 for 60 in that game. Whatever. Like he made a couple splash plays. That's not really something to write home about, but there was multiple times against Texas. He's uncovering down the field. He is a mailboxing Jalen Milroe, like, hey, throw me the dang fucking football. And Jalen Milroe just simply isn't getting there. And for what it's worth, if Jalen Milroe is getting any hype next year, like I would caution you to watch 2023 Texas because he's probably the reason why Alabama lost to Texas in that game, to be honest, man. Like, if he hit Jermaine Burton down the field a couple more times, I could see the complexion of that game being different. But when it comes to Jermaine Burton, like you said, I don't think natural ability is the thing that's stopping him. I think it is all mental. We saw it after the Tennessee loss last year. Fan comes on the field, Tennessee fan, I believe he punches this girl to the ground. Like, there's just something wrong in terms of his character that's keeping him from reaching that next level. But when you watch the film, when you see the flashes, when you see as a route runner, his arrogant hands, his ability to handle press, like I think he can definitely, if he can ward out some of the character concerns, which again, we say that about every talented receiver.
Honest to God,
year, so.
When you give these guys a bunch of money, I don't want to bet on them warding out character concerns all of a sudden.
It's just the ability is so damn good, and I can see him being a 1,100-yard receiver at the next level if he is able to. But unfortunately, that's the reason why we're talking about him as wide receiver 16 and 20 and not as wide receiver 6 in this class, because his off-field concerns, his character concerns, I truly believe led on to on-field lack of production.
Yeah, and I think there's no real solution for me when it comes to Jermaine Burton, because if he goes in the second round of the NFL draft, it means that a team is comfortable with that. But I think if he goes in the second round of the draft, that raises his rookie draft value, and he'll probably be a late second round, early third round rookie pick. I'm going to be passing on him at that point. If he goes in the fifth or the sixth round of the NFL draft, it means the character concerns are real, and people are still going to chase him because the tape is good enough that people can talk themselves into him. Depending on the price, I might be in on him. I actually prefer the latter. He goes later in the draft because the character concerns are real, and we get him in the fifth, sixth round of the NFL draft, and he's a fourth round rookie pick. At that point, I will take shots on him. But to be honest, I'm kind of hoping a team is, dumb enough to overlook the off the field stuff and take him in the top 50 of the draft so that my league mates can draft him, 208 or whatever in rookie drafts where he would go at that point in time. So for me, Jermaine Burton is just a guy I'm out on. I think the film has flashes, but when it comes to with this bad of a profile and the off the field concerns, I'm just going to let my league mates draft players like this.
It does. And for what it's worth, so we're talking about this 20 to 16 tier. Jermaine Burton is the number one for me here with a 75 grade. And like I said earlier, Devontez Walker is my 20 at 72.5. So we're talking about the difference between 20 and 16 as being a 2.5 grade.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned Javon Baker. We'll go on to Jalen Coker, who you mentioned you have in this year. I have him a little bit higher, and I have Baker right at 16, and you have him a little bit higher. So let's start with Baker, and then we'll go on to Coker and some of the next tier guys at 20 to, or at 15, to 11. So for me, the last guy of this tier is Javon Baker in this 20 to 16 range. I really wanted to like him more than I did, honestly. Like I see there's a lot of people who I trust in the fantasy space. I know Angelo's really, really high on Javon Baker. You also have him inside your top 12 wide receivers. For me with Javon Baker, this is what I keep coming back to. The things he does well: vertical threat, good size, 6'1", 202, had a pretty good, 4.5, 440 yard dash is solid for that size profile, 62nd percentile burst score. He makes the tough catches. I think he's got pretty strong hands. His yards after catch ability, I would say, is a small strength. I think he's got good breakaway speed to find open grass, but I don't think he's overly elusive. And he was productive. His production profile, his analytics profile in the model shout out that he actually is a pretty good prospect, and he might be being undervalued by the NFL as like a third, fourth round NFL draft capital guy. The model seems to think that he should be an early third, maybe even a late second rounder. So with Javon Baker, the things that get me off of him a little bit is I don't think he has a route tree whatsoever. Honestly, I think he knows how to run vertical routes. I think that his profile is blemished by the fact that he had to transfer away from Alabama to be productive in the first place. And then, like I said, that lateral agility, the explosive cuts, the breaks out of his routes are complete. Like, I know you're going to say that you thought he was more polished and stuff, but when I watched him on the routes that actually take skill to run, I noticed a lot of wasted steps. I noticed a lot of not coming clean out of his breaks. There's 2 plays against Texas Tech, I believe, where one of the plays he's running like a slant or like a clear out, like crossing route. And he rounds it off so hard that the DB undercuts it and picks it off. And then there was another play against Texas A&M where he's running kind of like it was supposed to be a zone hole shot versus like a cover 2 look. And he telegraphs the route so early. He's looking up for the ball so early. The safety closes in and picks the ball off. So for me, the little things of route running and the smarts of playing the game are things that he's going to need to get better at the next level. Can he do it? Probably. But I worry that he's never going to put it all together. And this is the type of prospect where I feel like people get really excited about because the flashes are so intriguing.
Yeah, and I think the reason why I have him higher than you is I've seen this exact archetype of wide receiver work out on my team specifically, and it's talking about my comparison for him straight up. This guy, to me, is a carbon copy of Michael Gallup coming out of Colorado State. And there's the same type of issues. Like, does he have a raw route tree? Sure, but I do see underrated nuance on the routes he does run when he is tasked to run some stop routes, run some breaks. When he's tasked to run some stop routes, when he's tasked to run some routes that require hard breaks, I do see that natural ability. Again, not as consistent, like you said. It's definitely going to have to work it out at the next level on a consistent basis. But I think right away he can give you a boundary X wide receiver that can win on the outside. But I do think the ceiling is higher than that. I love Michael Gallup. Like we saw, Michael Gallup didn't have the craziest rookie season, 507 yards, 2 touchdowns, playing for the Dallas Cowboys in 2018. We saw that second-year jump, 66 catches, 1,100 yards, 6 touchdowns. While it's, foolish to just say, oh, yeah, copy-paste Javon Baker, that's exactly going to be his career outline. I do feel like maybe year 1, it takes him a little bit of time, but by year 2, I do think he could be a really high-profile X receiver. And to be honest, man, if Michael Gallup never tears his ACL, we could be still talking about him in that light, because I really do feel like that physical X receiver that catches everything in his vicinity, that has more to his game that can be unlocked by a team working with him in the next level, is the exact blueprint for a guy like Javon Baker.
Yeah, I think the difference between him and Michael Gallup is that Gallup was extremely, extremely productive for 2 years at Colorado State, whereas Javon Baker, I feel, falls more on the De'Ami Brown, Traquan Smith side of the spectrum, where he was productive. You can talk yourself into his profile a little bit easier, but he wasn't dominant in terms of his production. And he also wasn't dominant in terms of his tape. And I got burned hard by De'Ami Brown, and Javon Baker screams De'Ami Brown 2.0 for me. So this is the type of prospect I'm probably going to let my league mates draft, because I do think that there is buzz around his name. And I do think that if he gets 3rd round draft capital, say to the Jaguars or something like that, I could see him going in the late 2nd, early 3rd of rookie drafts. And I bet there's going to be guys in that area of the draft that I prefer to Javon Baker. So I'll get some shares maybe here and there if he slides a little bit, but I would imagine this is the type of guy that I'm a little cautious of, because I'm worried that he might be kind of a De'Ami Brown type at the next level, where he doesn't have elite speed, doesn't have elite size. He's good downfield, but he's good downfield in college, and he doesn't have the route refinement to get better downfield. Like, in terms of downfield receivers, I actually think that Tez Walker has a higher ceiling in this area, and he's maybe even a little bit better right now because of that 4.36 speed. And then I also think Jermaine Burton is better as a route runner in this area as a downfield receiver. So between those 3 guys, I think they're all projecting as number 2, number 3 downfield wide receivers. Baker has the most complete of the profiles, but I also feel like there's some holes there.
If I'm going to bet on one of those, again, Jermaine Burton's tough for me because, like you said, the route running, the separation, like he could realistically be higher than I even have him ranked. But specifically with Tez Walker, I think Javon Baker's 3-level ability, even at this point, is much, much more improved compared to what Devontez Walker shows. And I think that's just the difference. I do think he's more nuanced of a route runner than you've given him credit for. And the other thing, of course, is, just seeing And again, I'm sure you can kind of relate to this as a Bucs fan, but seeing a receiver pay off with a similar archetype to a receiver in this upcoming class kind of gives you more, comfortability. Like, for example, next year, like, again, this projecting forward, I'm sure you're going to really like a guy like Tetairoa McMillan because he kind of exemplifies the Mike Evans way of winning, 6'5", 220 pounds. With Javon Baker, it just reminds me of carbon copy Michael Gallup. And for those of you that don't remember how good Michael Gallup was, man, like he was on track to be a star receiver.
Yeah. Again, I don't disagree with the Michael Gallup ceiling comp. I just think his median is more of a De'Ami Brown, which is identical, his prospect comparison in terms of the model grade. De'Ami Brown and him are literally right next to each other, which is what makes me think that's kind of his range of outcomes there. But I did like De'Ami Brown coming out, and I did think Michael Gallup was kind of the ceiling for him as well. So sometimes you just bat 50-50 on prospects like this. The next guy that we can talk about here, I believe you mentioned Jalen Coker was inside your top 20, but not inside your top 15. So actually, you know what? Let's go through our 15 to 11, and then we'll circle back to Coker because he's inside my top 15. So who do you have 15 through 11 right now?
So 15 through 11, and my number 15 is Malik Washington out of Virginia with a 76 grade. Like I mentioned with Burton and Roman, they are 75s. Ricky Pearsall from the Florida Gators ended up being a 76.5. Then we kind of see a little bit of a mini tier jump, if you will, in terms of grade. Jalen Polk, wide receiver of the Washington Huskies at 78.5, same grade as Javon Baker for me. And then number 11, the other Washington Husky receiver with Jalen McMillan coming in at a 79.
Okay, yeah, that's we have pretty much the same-ish names in there. I have at number 15, Ricky Pearsall, wide receiver from Florida. At number 14, I have Malik Washington from Virginia. Number 13, I have Jalen Coker from Holy Cross. As I mentioned, I'm a little bit higher on him. And then at 12, I have Jalen Polk. At 11, I have Jalen McMillan, both from the University of Washington. So let's circle back to Jalen Coker because you mentioned he was outside of your top 15 there. For me, I'll make the case for why I think he should be inside of your top 15. And full disclosure, we are evaluating Jalen Coker, I would say, off of more limited film than we were evaluating the other wide receivers because Holy Cross didn't have like 4 games of all 22 for us to access to be able to break this guy down. But in the limited action that I did see of him, he does check a lot of boxes, man. He's 6'1", 208 pounds. He's still 22 years old, despite being a 4-year player at a small school. 57th percentile speed score. He ran a 4.57 at 6'1", 208. He jumped 42.5 inches and 10-8'd the broad jump as well. That explosive ability really showed up for me on film. Steve Smith Sr. broke him down on his YouTube channel. And he talked about how good of a route runner he actually is for a young wide receiver in a, FCS type of conference. Yeah. And I was really impressed with him as a route runner, man. Like I was really impressed with how well he used his frame, how well his hand technique was at the top of his routes, how snappy his releases were, how well he was able to sink his hips, how tough he was at the catch point as well. I think his hands took a big time jump from the first 3 years of his career to this year. He only had 2 drops this year, and he had like a 7% drop rate overall, but a lot of that came early on in his college football career, and he absolutely dominated his offense, man. He had 15 of his 25 touchdowns in the offense. He had over 1,000 yards of 2,200 total passing yards in his offense. His market share production numbers and his analytics numbers are as good as anybody in this class. His model grade in the wide receiver prospect model is like a top 8 receiver because he legitimately had 3.51 yards per route run this year. He had a 35% target share over his career, 26% targets per route run, 52% contested catch rate this year, 4.07 yards per team pass attempt, which is the best in this class. I know this is a blasphemous name to bring up because he literally is the best wide receiver season we've ever seen in fantasy. But the last time we saw a small school wide receiver dominate like this, it was Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, I mean, I don't hate it, to be honest. You mentioned like, why you should be higher. I wanted to have him where you did. I wanted to grade him where you did. It's just the only issue I keep coming back to is I can't, with the limited film that I have on a small school guy, like going off of 2 games and having him as a top 15 guy just didn't sit right with me, to be honest. Like, yes, I love the flashes, the size, the overall polish that he showed despite being at a small school. But I keep coming back to the fact, like, I wish we had more samples against the Boston colleges, against the other FBS teams to really get a feel for what we're doing here. So the big difference, of course, you have him as a 78.0. I have him as a 74.5. So I'm objectively not low on Jalen Coker. Even having him in my top 20 is high praise given kind of what we've heard of him as maybe a late round sleeper. Like, no, this is a legitimate top 100 prospect in my opinion.
Absolutely. And again, I'm grading this guy based on talent right now. I fully expect him to go on day 3 of the NFL draft. And even though I said I have him ahead of Ricky Pearsall as it currently stands, that's my pre-draft grade. Ricky Pearsall is probably going to get drafted 3 to 4 rounds ahead of where Jalen Coker gets drafted. But if this dude sneaks into like round 4 or something, I'm going to be very, very excited about him, because in terms of overall sleepers in the prospect model, grading system, the best sleeper that's ever popped is Tyler Johnson. So day 3 prospects that have very high grades: Tyler Johnson, Isaiah Hodgins, Rashard Higgins, Puka Nacua, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Dede Westbrook, and Khalil Shakir. Those are the top 7 prospects who went day 3 in the NFL draft, but popped as good sleeper bets. And again, with sleepers, you're not going to bat 1,000, but Isaiah Hodgins has given you production. Puka Nacua obviously is the ultimate sleeper. Amon-Ra St. Brown ultimately became a superstar at the NFL level. Jalen Coker ranks as second on that list behind just Tyler Johnson. So, and for him, I think his stuff was mostly off the field concerns and attitude stuff. As a Bucs fan, I heard a lot of that when he was in Tampa Bay. So for me with Jalen Coker, when I get this guy in the 4th round of rookie drafts, because that's where he's going to go, especially if he's a 5th or a 6th or a 7th round NFL draft pick, hell, maybe he even goes undrafted. I really hope he doesn't. I hope he sneaks into like round 5 or round 6. I'm going to have this guy on like 95% of my teams.
Yeah, no, 100%. Well, maybe not that much because we're both in the same leagues together, but all jokes aside, yeah, like we're talking about potentially who can be, this year's Dontavian Wicks. And from both a physical comp perspective and from a tape comp perspective, I think Dontavian Wicks is the perfect comp. Maybe not high expectations coming into the year, but we really saw a guy like Dontavian Wicks come down the stretch in his rookie season.
Yeah, and full disclosure, Dontavian Wicks is usually the production we see out of a sleeper. Puka Nacua comes around once every 10 years.
Yeah.
Probably you don't usually see a rookie sleeper produce like Puka Nacua. It usually looks like Dontavian Wicks. It usually looks like Khalil Shakir or Josh Reynolds or somebody like that, where they give you better production than where they were drafted, but they're not a superstar alpha wide receiver 1. Although I will say, if I got a guy that could turn into a number 2 receiver at the next level, I think Jalen Coker, and as a Bucs fan, these are the types of prospects we're interested in, especially knowing that we have a 3 wide receiver set as it currently stands, and we could afford to sit back and develop a guy like Jalen Coker. I would be very excited if the Bucs spent like a 5th or a 6th round pick on this guy.
I was going to say, hey, if the Cowboys, because I do think the Cowboys need immediate production, but if they went with one, in the top 2 rounds and they wanted Jalen Coker as their developmental guy once Brandon Cooks leaves next year, then you would have a 3 wide receiver core of CeeDee Lamb, higher ranked rookie, and then Jalen Coker. Like, I can also see that being in play.
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe you mentioned you had Malik Washington just inside your top 15.
15th overall.
Let's talk about Malik Washington now, and then we'll circle back to Ricky Pearsall and the Washington receivers here. Malik Washington was a really interesting watch for me. I think the type of production profile we're talking about is kind of red flag-ish, right?
Yeah.
Like he had a very good final season, 5-year player, explosive, tough, great hands, great yards after catch type of production, was a screen merchant as well, similar to Malachi Corley, as we talked about, but he did have a lot of production in general. He had a 34.8% target share in 2023, which ranked first among all wide receivers in this class. 711 yards after catch in 2023, which ranked first among all wide receivers in this class. His PFF receiving grade, 92.4, which was second only to Malik Nabers in this class as well. And he dominated his offense, 25.6 PPR points per game, 47.4% dominator rating. So again, bit of a Fugazi production profile, but on film, I saw a lot of redeeming qualities out of this dude. Other than him being a 5th-year wonder, undersized in terms of 5'9", 191 pounds, and that he's going to be a slot receiver in the NFL, I really found it hard to come up with negatives for this guy because he actually reminded me a lot of Zay Flowers without the hype.
Yeah, no, I think it's funny that you mentioned that because my comparison for him on a similar spectrum, and it's honestly ironic that our 2 comps also both wear number 4 and both play very similar to Malik Washington. But you said Zay Flowers light. My guy is Curtis Samuel, where similar thing, slot receiver, could work at all 3 levels, underrated nuance. But I do think the size should be a limiting factor for him in terms of the ultimate ceiling here. However, if you need a number 2 pass catcher in terms of volume, number 3 overall weapon in the offense, I do think Malik Washington is in play in that 3rd round type of area for NFL teams. I really do think the explosive nature that he brings after the catch, underrated nuance as a route runner. I understand he was a screen merchant, but when he was asked to do big boy wide receiver things, unlike Malachi Corley, I really saw flashes of that potential with Malik Washington. And yeah, like the profile is, kind of sketch, 23.3 years old, not much production prior to this year, but he's the type of guy that the film does match the production of this year.
Yeah, and I think the types of teams that could use a guy like this, I think the Jets in round 4 is one that's popped as like a very significant match because you have Garrett Wilson on the outside. If they don't take Brock Bowers, if they go with an offensive lineman or something in the first round, I think that Malik Washington could be a good slot receiver for Aaron Rodgers, kind of be his Randall Cobb of the offense. That to me is like the ideal landing spot for a guy like Malik Washington. Go to an offense that needs a slot receiver, even the Cowboys too. I mean, you guys have CeeDee Lamb, who kind of works inside the slot sometimes, but he would be a good complement to CeeDee Lamb if you wanted a short area production guy to replace what you've, used your tight ends to. Because like obviously Jake Ferguson can do that, but if you had a slot receiver to complement Jake Ferguson in that role, that would make a lot of sense to me as well. So Malik Washington, again, I don't think he's as good as Zay Flowers. I don't think he's as, snappy as Zay Flowers, but he did have a 97th percentile burst score and ran 4.47. So he's a good athlete and he's built very compactly. And I was really impressed with his ability to like break tackles and, make you feel it when you brought him to the ground. So again, this wide receiver, I literally wrote in his fantasy outlook, this wide receiver class has everything. And a team that's looking for specifically a slot receiver will like Malik Washington.
100%. And I mean, you mentioned teams in the NFC East. I really do feel like if the Eagles, from an NFL fit, obviously from a fantasy fit, you don't want them to be buried behind A.J. Brown. You don't want them to be buried behind Devontae Smith. But if they got Malik Washington from an NFL perspective to play their slot with that physicality that A.J. Brown brings, with that nuance that Devontae Smith brings, I think that would also be the perfect fit.
Yeah, and again, if I had to pick a player to be this year's Tank Dell, not as productive as Tank Dell, just like slot receiver that catches a lot of passes at the next level, who was like a 3rd or a 4th round pick, Malik Washington would probably be my bet for this year's Tank Dell, quote unquote. So let's circle back to Ricky Pearsall from Florida, who has gotten a lot of buzz. Maybe people are annoyed that we're talking about him this early on in the video, because I've seen people say that Ricky Pearsall is the top 10 receiver in this class, or top 8 receiver in this class, potentially wide receiver 4 in this class, outrageously. Here's why I have him at 15, because he does do a lot of things well. He's a reliable target. He's a good route runner. He's got adequate yards after catch ability, solid quickness, a good feel for zone coverage, 71st percentile speed score, 4.41 at 6'1", 189 pounds. 97th percentile agility score and a 98th percentile burst score. So he's a great athlete and he's a good route runner. That equals probably going to be productive from a fantasy perspective. The thing that I worry about with Ricky Pearsall is that he has, in my opinion, a low ceiling only because a 23.6-year-old wide receiver who was productive, and I'm using the word productive generously, for one season makes me concerned, especially when you consider the fact that he played with Jaden Daniels at Arizona State and Anthony Richardson last year. So again, those guys are rushing quarterbacks, but they're first round quarterbacks. Like, they're good enough quarterbacks to get you the football. And Ricky Pearsall basically did nothing until this season, as well as his play strength and his downfield ability. I noticed he wasn't as strong of a route runner when it came to downfield ability. He wasn't as strong at the catch point as I've heard some other people say about him as a downfield player. So he's a hard guy to get a gauge on, because the film is objectively good. It's just the analytical profile is objectively one of the worst in this class.
Yeah, and it's funny because if I remember correctly, Christian Kirk had a good analytical profile. I mean, you can quote me in the comments.
He had a good profile, yeah.
Like, Ricky Pearsall stylistically reminds me of Christian Kirk. Is kind of how I put it. If he hits at the next level, it would be in a Christian Kirk type of vein. Slot receiver, gives you a little bit after the catch, underrated nuance from that position. It's probably never going to be a true one, I would say. Even Christian Kirk, despite having the mantle right now as the Jags wide receiver 1, like, we're linking them to Brian Thomas. We're linking them to, top end, like Brandon Ayuk, for example. Like, Christian Kirk, if he is the number 2 in your offense, you probably have a really good offense. If he's the number 1, you probably don't have a good offense. And I really do see that being the case for Ricky Pearsall. I feel like initially maybe he lands on a Carolina, he could be the number 1, but they would need that number 1, like, true superstar to pair next to him in the future. Pearsall, like you said, good separator, good route runner, good after the catch. Another thing that I want to talk about, man, when this ball is in the air, he is one of the best receivers in this class at tracking the football. Like, I saw it multiple times, especially in the South Carolina game, back shoulder balls, He's trying to locate the ball. He's catching it over his outside shoulder, and he's making it look effortless. Whereas some receivers in this class, like we'll get into Troy Franklin a little bit, not really his strong suit there.
Yeah, I think anywhere from Russell Gage on the low end, Khalil Shakir in the medium, and then maybe he gets to a Christian Kirk. I don't personally think he has a Christian Kirk caliber ceiling. I think that he's destined to be kind of a Khalil Shakir type at the NFL level. But at the same time, if he's in a good offense and he's like the number 2 target there, that could equal fantasy production. Again, the thing I keep coming back to with Ricky Pearsall is like, why didn't you produce prior to this year? And when you produced this year, like it still wasn't elite production. He had like 900 yards and 4 touchdowns or whatever in this season's production. So again, the profile says that this guy's like basically a landmine if he gets 2nd or 3rd round draft capital. Roman Wilson and Ricky Pearsall is the 2 guys in this class that are expected to be day 2 receivers that the model dislikes the most. And it says Ricky Pearsall is the caliber of prospect of a Khalil Shakir, of a Antonio Gandy Golden, of a Josh Reynolds, of a Kiki QT. Somebody like that is what it thinks Ricky Pearsall should be. And that's not where he's going to be drafted. We know, I think there's a chance he sneaks into round 1. Like he's going to go in the top 50, top 64 picks.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, you're giving the negative vein for him right now. He's your 15. He's my 14. You have him as a 76.0. I have him as a 76.5. So our thoughts on Ricky Pearsall are pretty consistent here. Like the film is very good. It's just when you break down the numbers, it's not often this type of profile of hits. Again, I want to believe in Ricky Pearsall. I have him as my top 15 receiver because I do think the film dictates him being this high, if not higher. But the main question here is going to be in the analytics department. You have him as a 6 out of 15. I have him as a 4 out of 15. It really is a concern.
Yeah, his analytical profile in the model is like 5th worst in this class. And we're talking about legit like going up against like Anthony Gold and stuff, like guys that are not even going to get drafted. He's like among the lowest in this class. And we're talking about a guy that could potentially be like wide receiver 8 off the board in terms of where the NFL actually drafts the guy. So for me, I will probably let my league mates draft a lot of Ricky Pearsall. I'll get some shares in the 3rd round of rookie drafts, maybe the late 2nd round in a good landing spot. But I think there's a chance that some people are going to take this guy like 203 or 205.
Yeah, like I can see, especially in more film-based type of rooms, like he's going to go higher than that. Again, I'd feel comfortable if he goes, round 2. Let's just say he lands on Carolina, Dallas, whatever, a team that needs that type of slot receiver. I can see him kind of, fighting into that mid-2nd round range. But like I would only really feel comfortable, to be honest, personally, either in the late portion of the mid-2nd or the 2-3 turn, most likely, assuming he gets that draft capital. But I'll just group the next 2 guys together because, I mean, obviously they played on the same football team. We can talk about where you have them ranked respectively. But for me, 13, Jalen Polk, 11, Jalen McMillan. Is it kind of similar for you?
I have him 12 and 11, and Polk is let's talk about Polk first because I have him at 12, the number 3 of the Washington receivers in this class. He has really good hands, probably the best hands in this entire class. I think he's a relatively fluid mover, and he's very physical. He's a well-rounded receiver, and he was asked to do everything at all 3 levels of the field because Michael Penix notoriously just like wanted to bombs away this offense. I actually don't think that Polk was really well suited for that role, but he did show that he could do it in the college football game. He's got some nuance and some market share numbers that tell you that he might not have the highest ceiling in the world, but we do have to contextualize the fact that he was playing with Rome Odunze, who is a stud prospect, and Jalen McMillan for portions of this year and the earlier portion of his college football career. So his profile is not great. He doesn't have elite speed. He ran a 4.52 at the combine. But if I had to project a guy as just like a rock solid number 2, number 3 wide receiver at the NFL level, I do think that Jalen Polk is a pretty high floor type of prospect. I think that there's a good chance when this class is all said and done 5-8 years from now,
like
we look back on this class and he's like the 7th or 8th best receiver from it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that projection. And it's funny because we talked about Brenden Rice earlier. It's like, if you kind of just like took the jack of all trades, master of none, but like upgraded it at each spot, you would basically just spit out Jalen Polk is kind of how I see it. I view him right away, like you said, immediately as soon as he gets drafted, being a productive NFL receiver. And our comps are kind of indicative of that. Like, although he was viewed as more of a downfield type of receiver in Washington, given the nature of the shot type of offense that they were operating, he honestly reminds me of like a Tyler Boyd. And with Tyler Boyd, it's funny because if you see his pit profile, it was kind of similar. He was used down the field specifically in that, I believe it was his true sophomore year. Junior year, he ends up being used more intermediate, but we did see flashes of him being used down the field in college. he goes to the NFL, ends up being a reliable, number 2, number 3 receiver, working in that intermediate portion of the field really throughout his NFL career. And I definitely see that type of projection for Jalen Polk. I think if the Patriots take a quarterback at number 3 overall, you can plug Jalen Polk right away next to Demario Douglas and have that possession, steady, chain moving type of receiver next to him. And although, like you said, just because I label him as this, intermediate receiver does not mean that he can't win down the field. He's got arguably the best hands in this entire class, is able to locate the football over his shoulder, very good ball tracker, very, very good at finishing at the catch point through contact. Like, there's really no negatives of his game aside from not being a top end athlete.
Yeah. And I think in every category, route running, other than hands, really, route running after the catch, lose points because he's not great at anything.
Yeah.
Really. He's good at everything. He's just not great at anything. So that's how I see Jalen Polk. And that's kind of what Rashee Rice represented his rookie season. And the way that he was used was he was good on short to intermediate routes in college. So that's what Andy Reid did with him in Kansas City. So if there's a team out there that needs a big slot receiver, like I do think the ceiling for Jalen Polk is like Juju Smith-Schuster, who was very good early on in his rookie contract and then kind of fell off after that. I think that Jalen Polk is anywhere from like a Tyler Boyd, Rashee Rice projection to maybe even a Juju Smith-Schuster or Chris Godwin at his best case scenario. But I feel very comfortable that he's going to probably play 5 to 10 years in the NFL.
Yeah, and ironically enough, we both have a 78.5 grade on him as the top 13 receiver in this class, and that's off the merit of him not having a single elite category that just propels his overall grade. That kind of goes to show you just how consistent across the board he is.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk about his teammate, Jalen McMillan, who is my wide receiver 11. I believe you're wide receiver 11 as well. Yeah. Hands-wise, he's definitely not as good as Polk. I think there was some issues with drops and contested catches and playing through contact. But that's really where the issues ended, man. Like, aside from him being a slot receiver who didn't work through contact very well, I thought his route running was extremely refined. I thought his short area agility was probably he had a 65th percentile agility score. I actually thought it was going to be closer to like Jackson Smith and Jigba's last year, which was like 97th percentile. He had good physicality. He was good yards after the catch wise. When you like stack up these receivers when they were all on the field together, Jalen McMillan was the number 2 receiver. He was out targeting Jalen Polk, and he was actually quite close to Rome Odunze in terms of his overall target share. And when it comes to, again, today's NFL wide receiver, we love these like 6'3", 215-pound X wide receiver ones. What has won recently in the NFL when it comes to fantasy production? It's been these like over the middle PPR guys, and Jalen McMillan in this Jackson Smith and Jigba, maybe even an Amon-Ra St. Brown type of range of outcomes. I actually really, really like Jalen McMillan as a value in rookie drafts because especially if he goes like 3rd round to the Broncos, I think people will think that's a ho-hum landing spot, whatever the case is. But that's a spot where he can earn targets. That's a spot where he can be a PPR guy in an offense where a coaching staff would know how to use him that way. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, we've seen who's going to end up being the Michael Thomas for Sean Payton's offense in Denver. It's definitely not going to be Courtland Sutton. I really do feel like it could be Jalen McMillan if he slots in that role. Like you said, probably only, a Z slot receiver projection at the next level. Don't think he's the greatest athlete. And like you said, the hands are not an asset for him, but everything else he shines. As a route runner, absolutely disgusting. After the catch, very, very good player. Very, very tough run blocker. Smart player on the football field. Doesn't get used down the field, which again, profiles into that slot archetype. If you just need that power slot that can give you some juice after the catch, I really do feel like Jalen McMillan is your guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't really have anything else to add about him, to be honest. I just think that the only concern I really have right now is like make sure he goes in the top 2 rounds or top 3 rounds of the NFL draft. I don't want him to slide to like the 4th or the 5th round. Otherwise, we'll have to lower him. But he's a guy that I'm going to end up with a lot on my rookie draft rosters because I really, really do like what he brings to the table. So let's go through 10 to 7 here. We're going to go through 10 to 7 because for us, it represents kind of like a tier break. We'll talk about all these guys eventually, but there is like the first tier, we know there's the top 3 receivers. Then there's kind of like a mini tier in between the top 3 receivers, at least the way that we both look at it. So I need you here to list off your wide receivers 10 through 7.
Oh boy, it's like Christmas morning, just unveiling just how gifted some of these guys are. Number 10 for me, Troy Franklin of the Oregon Ducks. Number 9, Keon Coleman of the Florida State Seminoles. Number 8, Xavier Legette of the South Carolina Gamecocks. 7, I got Xavier Worthy of the Texas Hook'em Horns. And then, of course, his teammate A.D. Mitchell ranking out as my wide receiver 6. All of them within an 81 to 84 grade on my grading cycle.
Yeah, so for me, I have Keon Coleman from Florida State at 10. I have Xavier Legette, South Carolina, 9. Adonai Mitchell at 8 from Texas. Troy
Yep.
Franklin at 7 from Oregon. And then Lad McConkey at 6 from Georgia. So let's get things kicked off with, let's go Keon Coleman first. We both had him towards the back end of our top 10s here. I would love to just hate Keon Coleman like everybody seems to, but there's something about him that I just get excited about when I watch him. You know what I mean? Like, everybody's like, oh, he's a contested catch guy with a horrible contested catch rate. It's like, have you seen Jordan Travis play quarterback? Have you seen Keon Coleman actually win on contested catches when they're thrown properly? Because he's going to win at a high level above the rim. Obviously, two-sport athlete, played basketball at Michigan State as well. Very physical. I think he's underratedly very good after the catch as well. They surprisingly used him as like a screen merchant at Florida State, which was super, super weird because they never used him that way at Michigan State in 2022. He has a high ceiling, in my opinion. I think he can develop into a very strong number 2 big slot receiver, maybe play on the outside. He's a raw route runner. He's lacking elite speed. 4.61 is what he ran at the combine. But again, in-game athleticism, he ranks very highly according to sites like PFF. And of course, he ran his gauntlet drill like the fastest of any receiver at the combine. He has some mental mistakes. He's lacking some production. But we can kind of explain away some of this stuff. At Michigan State, he outproduced Jaden Reed. This year, he outproduced Johnny Wilson, Jaheim Bell, and Trey Benson in that offense as a receiver. So there's NFL caliber competition this guy was competing with. I see him as like a project number 1 receiver because he's not even going to be 21 years old on draft night. And this is a weird archetype. Like, Matt Harmon charted him and he was like, there's not a lot of receivers that win unless they kick inside. And we've seen Juju Smith-Schuster and Rashee Rice and Allen Robinson and Michael Thomas and some of these guys that were like not elite X wide receiver ball winners on the outside because of the lack of athleticism, kick inside half their snaps and become dominant PPR wide receiver ones.
So for what it's worth, if you look at his RAS compared to Allen Robinson, 6'3", 220 pounds, bad 40-yard dash listed at a 4.6, but everything else in terms of the vertical jump, the broad jump, like he ended up getting an 8.86 RAS regardless. So when you're talking about Keon Coleman, he ended up getting a 9.18 RAS despite running a 4.61. That goes to show you that outside of linear speed, we're talking about a very, very good elite athlete. I mean, there's a reason why he played basketball at Michigan State. You see him being able to attack the football, like you said, in the gauntlet drill, had the highest, in-game speed at the combine in terms of running that gauntlet drill from a 4.61 receiver. What that tells me is that despite not having the overall, straight line speed that we're looking for, when the ball is in the air, he does not slow down. He attacks the football with violence, and he keeps throughout the phase of his route. Whereas when we get to, again, this is the reason why I have him ahead of a guy like Troy Franklin, which we'll get into in a second. With Troy Franklin, he has all the God-given gifts, but hasn't been able to figure it out from a compete level. Compete is not the issue I have with Keon Coleman. And like you said, the way this works out is Allen Robinson. The way this works out is Michael Thomas. And people might be watching this thinking, well, not every project big receiver can end up being those guys. But when you watch the tape on Keon Coleman, it's hard not to envision that type of ceiling if he lands with the right coach at the next level.
Yeah, it's difficult because they'd be right. There's definitely players like this that don't
100%.
work out. Like Cedric Tillman, for example, last year, maybe was the type of archetype we're talking about here. Even Jonathan Mingo, a bit faster, but kind of the same type of archetype here. The thing I keep coming back to with Keon Coleman is like the toughness level, the physicality, and the ability to kind of showcase to me that he's getting better, even though he's a young player, is what makes me buy into Keon Coleman. Also, it helps that in Dynasty rookie drafts, nobody seems to want this guy. And I'm the only one who seems to be okay drafting him in the mid-second round where he's going. If he was projected to be the 110 in rookie drafts, there's no chance I would be touching Keon Coleman with a 10-foot pole. But because the perceived value on the market in most leagues is so low on Keon Coleman, it makes me want to see the best out of him because I do see some things that could lead to him being a productive NFL wide receiver. It's everybody looks at him. They're like, he can't separate. He's going to be terrible.
Yeah, no, 100%. People are so quick to pigeonhole him based off the fact that he's a raw receiver without elite speed. But I mean, I keep coming back to it. I hate to sound like that boomer on the Twitter replies, but there's some guys you just got to watch the damn tape on, man. And Keon Coleman is absolutely one of them.
Yeah, again, there's just something about him. Honestly, there's just something about him. When I watch him, I'm like, he's not bad. Like everybody says he's bad, but he's not bad. He's not Quentin Johnston. I can tell you right now, the compete level of Quentin Johnston was not near the level of compete level out of Keon Coleman, but you could make the argument that we're talking about a similar archetype here, to a similar projection here, a guy that might have to move into the slot, might have to be tasked with some more short and intermediate routes. And I think that Keon Coleman, given how young he is and given what I saw as a progression of a player at Michigan State to Florida State, he did some things better at one school, some things better at the other school. There's enough there to make me think that an NFL coaching staff that's good at coaching receivers could turn him into a productive NFL player. One of my favorite landing spots for him is a team notoriously that hits on wide receivers, and that's the Pittsburgh Steelers, using him as a big slot receiver complement to George Pickens. Ironically, they were the last team Allen Robinson played for also.
Yeah, I was going to point that out too. And yeah, it's funny. He more than likely will fall to round 2 based off the 4.61, because quite simply the NFL teams, even if they had him as a tie on their board, like they're going to favor the projectable speed. But once he lands in that 50 to 75 range, we're talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers. We're talking about potential contending teams like the Dallas Cowboys. Maybe you guys end up taking him to eventually replace Chris Godwin as your big slot. Maybe, a team like the Buffalo Bills, say they pass on a receiver round 1, want, that possession receiver to pair next to Josh Allen. He makes a ton of sense. Like, I really do feel like wherever Keon Coleman lands, I trust that coaching staff to be able to get the best out of him.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's because there's tail of the tapes on the other 8 wide receivers we're going to talk about. Let's talk about Xavier Legette from South Carolina here, even though technically you have Franklin at 10, and we'll circle back to Franklin. But with Xavier Legette, I mean, analytics bros hate this guy. I mean, rightfully so. He was a 5-year player. He only was productive his final season at South Carolina. He's going to be 23 years old on draft night. He's a complete one-year wonder. Outside of a cool, funny accent, there's not a whole lot that everybody likes about this guy. But when you plug in the film, I thought he was underratedly fluid as a route runner for his size. You don't typically see a 6'1", 221-pound receiver who runs in the 4.3s, who had an 89th percentile burst score, actually move laterally as well as he does. It is reminiscent. You can plug in one play of Xavier Legette and talk yourself into the next AJ Brown, the next DK Metcalf, the next Deebo Samuel, like a big physical bully style wide receiver. Doesn't come around like this very often. I think his ceiling is incredibly high as a result of that. He's very tough, very physical at the catch point. He absolutely dominated SEC caliber corners like Kamari Lassiter at Georgia. And he's very explosive after the catch. That 4.39 is no joke. He plays that fast, and he also has good bursts as a result. So again, if you told me this guy was 21 years old and he was productive his sophomore year and his freshman year as well, we would all be screaming that this guy's wide receiver 4 in the class. The production profile and the analytics profile can be explained away with some personal stuff and COVID years and, that kind of thing. But the bottom line is it's still bad. He still should have been more productive.
For sure. And I'll give the story for those that haven't heard it. It's probably one of the biggest pieces of draft lore in this entire offseason is just understanding the context behind Xavier Legette. This is a guy who played at a small high school as the starting quarterback there, ends up getting to South Carolina, loses both of his parents, I believe, in high school or at the beginning of his university career. So definitely a mental hurdle. COVID hits. He's dealt with his fair share of injuries. Obviously falls behind some of those refined receivers that South Carolina had. We're talking about a guy like Jalen Brooks played in the NFL. We're talking about Juju Wells, who's a big-time prospect. Contextually speaking, coming from a small school, playing a different position, like I understand why it was such a slow burn to get to where he was. He ends up having, of course, that big breakout game, last year's bowl game against Notre Dame, I believe 7 for 78 and 3 touchdowns working with Spencer Rattler. They build that rapport in the offseason, obviously has this big breakout year. And the best way to put it, man, is he is just diet DK Metcalf, to be honest, where DK Metcalf kind of had a similar profile, but at a big school like Ole Miss, playing next to AJ Brown, playing next to a couple, Elijah Moore was on that team as well, better target competition. But when you see the flashes of this type of athlete, 220 plus pounds, sub 4.4 speed, dominating on crossing routes, is able to attack the football when it's in the air, man, like it's hard not to get excited when you plug this guy's film in. And I get it. I understand. I have him as a sub 10 out of 15 grade. I have him as an 8 out of 15 grade on the analytics, and he still ended up grading as my wide receiver 8.
Yeah, and I had to lower his route running grade and stuff because Harmon was lower on his ability to beat press than I was. But again, Harmon only charts a certain number of games. Maybe I just watched games where he was better against press. Yeah. I'm not going to let anybody talk me out of Xavier Legette completely. I'm letting people talk me down on him a little bit because he started out like wide receiver 5 in this class for me after the first watch and the first grading of him. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I understand that concern. I'll bump him down a little bit, but if I'm on the board at 204 in my rookie drafts and he gets second round draft capital to a team that I think is like a decent landing spot for him, I'm going to press the button on Xavier Legette pretty often.
Yeah, 100%. We're talking about maybe he goes to the Colts and he can end up being like, it's funny. I talked about Diet DK Metcalf, but we're talking about Shane Steichen. Maybe he can get him on, not obviously the full capabilities of what AJ Brown showed, both as an X receiver, as a true separator on the boundary. But we saw when Shane Steichen had AJ Brown, being able to move him to the slot, getting him on crossing patterns, getting him to get that build-up speed going. I can definitely see that being the case for Xavier Legette. You have Michael Pittman as your number one. You have Josh Downs as your slot. Why not get Xavier Legette as your crossing route demons Z receiver?
You know what I actually think is the best landing spot for him that nobody would like if he actually went there? I think if the Patriots took Drake May, I would love him to be their second round pick, because Drake May is a gunslinger. He's going to trust a big receiver like Xavier Legette, and Xavier Legette is reliable, unlike anybody that Drake May played with outside of Josh Downs in his collegiate career. So I would love 34th or whatever the Patriots pick is overall draft capital Xavier Legette to the Patriots with Drake May, because everybody hates the Patriots when they take receivers. They don't know how to scout them. And I think you could get a really good value on Xavier Legette, 205 to 207 type of area. And he could turn into a number one receiver for an NFL team and potentially a really good quarterback as well. So that'd be the type of landing spot I would love for him to go to, where he could actually be the number one receiver right from jump if he's the player that I saw on film, not necessarily the player that I saw in the numbers at South Carolina. So the next guys that we're going to talk about, we do have tail of the tapes on all of these players. So the profiles and some of the breakdowns, we've already done this. We're going to speed through these guys a little bit faster. We wanted to get through the deeper names, the guys that we haven't talked about as much. Troy Franklin, you mentioned, is your wide receiver 10. So he is my wide receiver 7 in this class. I have gone back and forth on Troy Franklin. It is insane. He started this offseason as my wide receiver 5. Then I moved him down to wide receiver 8. Then I moved him down to wide receiver 10. And now he's back up to wide receiver 7 for me. And the reason he's so polarizing is because of all the prospects in the prospect model, his analytics grade is 5. His total grade is 5. So outside of the top 3 receivers and Xavier Worthy, this is a guy that stacks up extremely well on paper because he was very productive at Oregon. He got better every single year in every statistical category: target share, targets, receptions, yards, touchdowns, yards per route run, receiving grade. He got better every single year. He's still just 21.2 years old. The really big detractors you have of Troy Franklin are on film, because he has good speed. He's a good route runner at times. On a vertical route tree, he can beat press man. Yards after catch and ability in open space, he's very good at. And like I said, his production profiles nails. The problem that you have with this guy is his ability to work through contact, his ball tracking, his hands can be a liability at times, and the fact that he's got a slender frame. The reason I have him ahead of some of the other guys is I keep coming back to the point that if Troy Franklin put on 15 pounds of muscle and was able to play at a better level in the NFL than he was able to play in college through contact, I think he would be clearly a top 5 receiver in this class. So for me, he has the most correctable issue of the other guys. Like, you can't fix Xavier Legette's production profile. You can't fix it. What you can do is bet on a good profile like Franklin and hope that he adds a little bit more physicality to his game. It's a bit of a leap. It's a bit of a concern for him, but I do think Jamison Williams is the median projection, and maybe even a Calvin Ridley or a Devontae Smith is the high-end projection.
Yeah, and the low end projection, you're looking at maybe Jalen Hyatt coming off of, a weird college system, not really being able to acclimate to the physicality, the nuance of the NFL. Like, I do see flashes of nuance in his film, and again, like that's why I think a Calvin Ridley would be the ceiling. But unfortunately, on a down-to-down basis, he kind of, from a nuance standpoint, lacks. Obviously, at the catch point, very, very. Obviously, at the catch point, very, very much of a struggle of his. And I noticed, like, people will detract on Bo Nix and say, well, he can't throw the deep ball. Well, to be honest, I was watching the film, and multiple times he was on the money with his deep balls. It's just, unfortunately, Troy Franklin was not able to track the ball. That is the issues with Troy Franklin. And it's kind of like the inverse of, in my opinion, Keon Coleman and Xavier Legette, where basically people are going to have them a lot lower. And I'm saying, watch the film. That's why they should be this high. With Troy Franklin, it's the inverse, because obviously from a straight number standpoint, like, he's the wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 in this class, but I would question ranking him that high, specifically off those issues when it comes to play strength, when it comes to natural hands, when it comes to tracking the football on film.
Yeah, I actually think Franklin is a good fit for the Steelers as well, given the bombs away nature of Russell Wilson and the fact that Pickens is going to handle the press man coverage and that kind of thing. again, with all of these guys, we're talking draft capital, we're talking landing spot being the deciding factor post-draft.
For sure.
But if you're on the board at 202 and Troy Franklin's the best available player and say RB1 or RB2 got top draft capital and they're off the board already, then yeah, Troy Franklin's definitely a worthwhile pick, and I'd be happy to be holding the 202 in my rookie draft as a result. It's just some people are saying this guy's like the 109 or the 110 in this class, and to me, I just can't get there with Troy Franklin.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. Again, like for what it's worth, we have I have an 81.0, you have an 81.5. He's your wide receiver with 7 versus my 10. Like we have similar thoughts on this guy. It's just I would tell people to ease the roll when they want to put him up there next to some of the names that we have at the top, because I really do feel like specifically the top 3, obviously tier their own, we'll get to in a second. But even in my opinion, the 4 through 6, I would comfortably take over Troy Franklin, and we'll just get into those guys right now, to be honest.
Yeah, so this is a divisive guy because Adonai Mitchell, I don't have in this second tier of receiver with 4, 5, and 6. You do have him, I would assume, in this second tier of 4, 5, and 6. The reason I'll give the bear case for him if you want to give the bull case for him.
Sure.
As a Texas fan, I didn't see the level of route running that some people are seeing on a consistent play basis. Is there routes where he looks like CeeDee Lamb? Absolutely. Is there more routes that he doesn't look like CeeDee Lamb? Absolutely. So the fact that he is not a target hog, in fact, in our prospect model, he ranks as the only wide receiver who's expected to go in round 1, who is projected to be a landmine caliber prospect. We're talking Henry Ruggs, Jalen Reagor, Kadarius Toney caliber of first-round receiver in terms of his overall analytical profile. Yeah, he's an early declare. Yeah, he's 6'2", 205 pounds, and has a 9.98 relative athletic score, running a 4.34 at that size profile. But the fact, like, how are you not producing if you're that much better of an athlete and that big and that good on a play-to-play basis sometimes? To me, it shouts that he is similar to he's the better Jermaine Burton in this class, where he might have some mental lapses, might have some off the field attitude, work ethic type of concerns, which is why my comp for him is George Pickens. So I don't want to totally say that this guy is a horrible prospect and you should never draft him because of some of the lapses he has in his game, because George Pickens was able to overcome those things. And I think, to be honest, George Pickens was a better prospect because George Pickens' freshman season was better than anything Adonai Mitchell has done in his entire college career. So that's the thing I keep coming back to with Mitchell. It's like, you're going to make the bull case for him. And I understand the bull case, but he is easily the single most boomer bust prospect in this class. And as of right now, given the price that we're going to see for him as a first round receiver, I lean towards fading rather than buying.
Yeah, and I think those are very fair concerns for Adonai Mitchell. On a play in, play out basis, it's a mixed bag. It's kind of like, you got like Lad McConkey is like the boat, and like Adonai Mitchell is like the question mark. And it's like, oh, he could be the boat on some plays, or he could just be non-existent. And that's kind of when it comes down with Adonai Mitchell, where you watch one play of him and you think, oh my God, the footwork at the line of scrimmage, the release package that he has, being able to snap off his breaks, the guy looks like CeeDee Lamb. And again, I watch CeeDee Lamb probably more than anybody, man. I watch every single Cowboys game. I watch every single CeeDee Lamb target. Like, Adonai Mitchell's high points legitimately look like that of a nuanced route runner that is able to attack the football when it is in the air. The problem, like you said, is I don't know if he's disinterested at times. I don't know if he needs to be in clutch situations to clock in, but you'll get to like the second and third quarter of games and be like, where is Adonai Mitchell? Like, we got a 4.34 wide receiver with 97th percentile speed score, 96th percentile burst score, legitimately one of the freakiest athletes on the field that, despite, like you said, he's a raw route runner in the sense that he doesn't do it consistently. But when he does do it, man, like a 15 out of 15 on route running would literally be the grade. But the problem is he's either 15 of 15 as a route runner, or he's 8 out of 15, 7 out of 15, given what he shows on a play in by play out basis. What I keep coming back to with Adonai Mitchell is that when Texas needed a big play, when Georgia needed a big play, college football playoff games, need a touchdown type of situation, going on the road to play Alabama, Adonai Mitchell made those plays. And again, maybe it's kind of a factor with George Pickens where it's like, oh my God, the high end is so high end, and I want to believe that he can consistently get there on the next level when he has that proper coaching in the NFL. But I can't quit him, man. Similar to Keon Coleman, I cannot quit Adonai Mitchell because I see the high end as legitimately being top 5 to 10 NFL receiver upside.
Yeah, this is like, we haven't really mentioned specific dynasty league settings, but when you're in a start 7, start 8, 1 quarterback dynasty league, that's the type of league I'm more likely to swing for an Adonai Mitchell. If you're in a start 12 or a start 11 where you could start up to a bunch of flexes and that kind of thing, I think Keon Coleman's floor is a lot higher. I think Troy Franklin's floor is higher. I think that Xavier Legette's floor is higher. So maybe you favor those types of guys. And again, it's going to come down to price for me. If AD Mitchell's the 28th overall pick to the Buffalo Bills, he is going to be the 109 or the 110 in rookie drafts, and I will 100% be trading down from spots like that and potentially just drafting other receivers straight up over him, depending on where Xavier Worthy goes, Ladd McConkey goes, and some of these other guys. But I still get the upside. I still see the upside. I know it's there. It's just so challenging to think, why didn't he hit it? And to me, the reason why he didn't hit it is because he has a little bit of attitude concerns, a little bit of work ethic concerns, which hopefully can get ironed out at the next level. But when it comes to these athletes suddenly being thrown a boatload of money, I get skeptical that they're going to suddenly work hard.
And I agree with landing spot being specific for him. Not necessarily like, oh, I want him to go to the Bills or the Chiefs because, like, you know, Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, like, he's got the high ceiling. Obviously, that's built in. But if I can land him on a team with an established receiver already where he can learn from him, for example, if he goes 24th overall to my Dallas Cowboys, he learns from CeeDee Lamb. He learns how to be a professional. Obviously, from a God-given standpoint, like, you're talking about 6'2", 205 pounds, moving the way he does. Like, if CeeDee Lamb can rub off the, you know, the intangible, the nuanced traits onto him, like, he's a better athlete than CeeDee Lamb is. Like, we can envision CeeDee Lamb being a 1,700 yard, you know, 15 touchdown receiver at his peak, and AD Mitchell being next to him as a 1,200 plus yard receiver. I really do see that being in the range of outcomes, despite being, you know, labeled as the number 2 in his offense.
Yeah, again, the Bucs have a connection to him. Obviously, our wide receiver coach coached him at Georgia, and Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are hell of pros to learn behind and learn how to be a professional. I happen to think that Jason Light will have him completely off of his board, just knowing how Jason Light values character and that kind of thing. But if a team like that were to select him 26th overall or whatever, then I would feel pretty good about maybe he doesn't actually have these off the field concerns. But the interview scores that David Z on Twitter puts out, AD Mitchell didn't rank very highly in them. And I kind of buy that, to be honest. And for what it's worth, his teammate Xavier Worthy was the best of all of the receivers in terms of those interview scores. But we're not going to talk about Xavier Worthy yet, because there's one guy that we do need to talk about first. I believe I have him at 6. I'm assuming you have him at 5. Is that Ladd McConkey?
I have Ladd at 5, and the guy that you have higher than me, I have at 7. So we could talk about Ladd McConkey first, and then we can get into the guy that isn't really divisive, because we both have high grades on him, but is more divisive than I would say Ladd McConkey, because we pretty much agree exactly word for word, bar for bar with what Ladd McConkey is going to be in the next level, and that's going to be a damn good number 2, potentially number 1 volume weapon on an offense.
Yeah, he's an excellent route runner. He runs in and out breakers better than anybody in this class. Like, honestly. And
easily.
The first thing I wrote down on this guy was, this is a PPR wide receiver 1 in the right landing spot, like Amon-Ra St. Brown. My comp for him is Golden Tate. He has the route running chops. He has the speed. You have Doug Baldwin as the comp. He has the yards after catch elusiveness. When we broke him down in the film breakdown, we were gushing about how explosive and how fluid this guy is in the open field. Reliable hands, football IQ, Georgia Bulldog toughness. I feel he's one of the highest floor receivers in this class. If you are playing in a start 11, start 12 dynasty league, and you want to just hit a PPR wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 projection to throw into your third flex, Ladd McConkey is your guy, because even though he's not the greatest against press coverage, he's lacking some production on his profile. The film is just so good, man. And the downfield usage is not going to be there. The injury history factors in a little bit. I think this season would have been the blow-up year from Ladd McConkey. And you got to remember, too, Brock Bowers is the number 1 in this offense. So he is operating in an offense that doesn't throw the ball very much as the number 2 receiver. And had he not gotten injured this year, he would have built upon what he did as a redshirt freshman when George Pickens was on the field with him and Adonai Mitchell was on the field with him. He was productive that year. As a sophomore or as a junior, he was really solid in that season. And then this year as a senior, he got hampered by the injury. He suffered it in training camp and then suffered a different injury, an ankle injury mid-season. And it completely derailed his entire season. Athletically, he stacks up to Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. So miss me with the he's Hunter Renfrow and he's got to move into the slot. He can play on the outside.
9.32 RAS. And the best way I can describe Ladd McConkey is, let's just say your wide receiver room in the NFL is built like a charcuterie board, right? Ladd McConkey is that smooth brie that you'll just put in the middle and it'll connect everything together. Ladd McConkey is the guy that, maybe he won't be your number 1 in the future. Maybe he won't be that dominant boundary X receiver that is going to be the main flavor of the play. But guess what? You mix in a little bit of brie on that cracker tastes even better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we keep talking about the Steelers, but he also makes sense for them too, as a compliment to George Pickens. But I think Carolina is a great landing spot for him. I think the Patriots are a great landing spot for him. I think that Kansas City and Baltimore are good landing spots for him. There's a number of, he's also the most scheme diverse, I would say, of any receiver in this class. The only places I don't think he should really go to are teams that have an established Z receiver and slot receiver already, where he can play both roles. Like if you want to put him on the outside 65% of the time, move him into the slot 35% of the time, that makes a whole lot of sense to me. Another underrated landing spot I think would be good for him. They're not going to really pick in the range where he's going to go unless they trade down. But I think if somehow the Jets wanted to get a hand on Lad McConkey, he'd be a perfect complement to Garrett Wilson as well. He's a great player. We don't really have to spend more time on him. The tail of the tape is live for Lad McConkey already. You already talked about it with a guy that we are a little bit more divisive on, which is Xavier Worthy. I have him as my wide receiver 4 in this class. You have him as your wide receiver 7 in this class. The reason I have him at wide receiver 4, because a lot of people will talk about he's just 4.21 speed. That's the only thing he brings to the table. Well, no, he also has elite side-to-side agility, and not every 4.2 receiver has side-to-side agility. So you can miss me with the names that all ran in the 4.2s and never produced at the NFL level, because none of them played like a dog like Xavier Worthy did. I mentioned his interview scores. He's a smart player. He understands how to play football. He is not a track athlete playing football. He's a football player who happens to be very fast, and he was extremely productive in college. He had a great freshman season. A lot of people might be saying, what happened? Why was that his best season? That 1,000-yard, 12 touchdown season that he had as a true freshman with subpar quarterback play. He gets Quinn Ewers. He's expected to be a first-round quarterback in next year's class. Newsflash to you guys. His quarterback play his freshman season was better than his sophomore and his junior season, even though people like to talk themselves into Quinn Ewers being some first-round caliber quarterback prospect. If Arch Manning was starting last year, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, because Xavier Worthy would have had a much better junior season. He also played through a broken hand his sophomore year. He had way more target competition as a junior with Adonai Mitchell and Jatavian Sanders and Jonathan Brooks and all these guys. The bottom line is, this dude came out and literally broke college football at 18 years old and destroyed the University of Oklahoma in the Red River rivalry game at 18 years old. So we're talking about a dude that has the profile, has the speed, doesn't have the size. Obviously, he's 5'11", 165 pounds. He had some drops in 2022, but like I said, his hand was broken half that season, and he doesn't play through contact with the effectiveness level of a bigger receiver. But for his size, I believe he does it at a high level. So contested catches and stuff, that's not his game, but I believe he can still play on the outside at the NFL level.
The big difference between us is you think he'll end up being a number 1 wide receiver, like, for example, what we saw from Jalen Waddle prior to Tyreek Hill coming in. I think more so his best role is going to be that speedy number 2, a la Marquise Brown. And I think you label the cons very well. Doesn't really play well given the frame in terms of attacking the football. I do feel
it's not that he doesn't try. That's the thing that I keep coming back to. He tries, is that if he did add weight and he got more effective in that area, it's not that he like him and Franklin, for example, Franklin doesn't seem to have the same.
He doesn't have the compete versus Xavier Worthy does.
And instincts to get the football. Worthy tries, he just gets out muscled.
Yeah, which it's still concerning to me that given the size, we can expect him, if he's getting out muscled at the next level, to be, getting out muscled at the college level, to be out muscled at the NFL level. Like you said, I had a slightly lower grade on his route running. You had a 14 out of 13. Still a very good route runner. I don't think he's the technician like a Lad McConkey is, but for what it's worth, he is not some, fucking burning threat wide receiver that can't run routes. No, he can run routes 100%. And I'm glad that you mentioned that. With Xavier Worthy, what it comes down to for me is, given the frame, given the overall physical nature that we can expect at the next level, can he replicate what he was able to do at college? And again, I still have a high grade on him. He's still an 82.0, still top 7 wide receiver for me. It's just those factors compared to some of these physical beasts we see in my top 6, and Lad McConkey, who is the most refined route runner in this entire class, bar maybe Odunze or Marvin Harrison Jr. I can't put him on the level of those guys, but I definitely do see the allure of Xavier Worthy. And again, although you would probably take him 109, 110 given the landing spot, he's more so a guy I'd feel comfortable in the early portion of the second.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, in the prospect model, this guy fits into the wide receiver 2 upside tier, and projected second-round draft capital as of right now says that if he does go in the second round of the NFL draft, he'll probably slide more to that 112, 201 area of rookie drafts. And to me, in that area of the draft, he's an absolute smash, because he stacks up very favorably to guys like Jackson Smith and Jigba and Jerry Jeudy and Treylon Burks and Mike Williams and N'Keal Harry. And again, some of these guys didn't work out, but as prospects, they were very solid prospects. And Xavier Worthy, honestly, has better film than a lot of those guys. Like his prospect profile is better than that of a DJ Moore, of a Marquise Brown, of a Rashad Bateman, of a Jalen Waddle, of a Jordan Addison, of a Chris Olave. So on a prospect level, we're talking about a very solid bet, in my opinion. Like these prospects that were second round picks that end up being that smash category, we're talking about a very small list of AJ Brown, T. Higgins, and Elijah Moore. And I would bet on all three of those prospects 10 times out of 10, even though Elijah Moore hasn't exactly worked out from that group.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I like Xavier Worthy. It's just the guy that I have next. And I think we can just pretty much get into our top five. Obviously, my five, we've already discussed Lab McConkey. So it's my top four and your top. Wait, no, we just discussed Xavier Worthy.
Worthy is my four. So this is
our top
my
four.
Five, your four. Yeah. So this is the last guy before we get into the top three tier. And we're going to just breeze through the top three guys because we've been talking about them super often this offseason, and we already have gone really long in this video. But Brian Thomas Jr. is your wide receiver 4, my wide receiver 5.
Yeah, 100%. And with Brian Thomas Jr., the reason why I am so high on him is, man, we don't see a lot of players like this built out of a lab. We're talking about legit 6'3", 205 pounds, 4.33 speed, 99th percentile speed score, 83rd percentile burst score. And when I plugged on the tape, man, he was a lot more nuanced than I expected as a receiver of his physical gifts coming into that film session. But I'll let you get into some of the cons because obviously you're slightly lower. Again, you have an 84.25, I have an 86. So we're both extremely high on Brian Thomas, but there's a reason why he's your 5 versus your 4. I'll let you take it away with the cons before I come back with the pros that I saw.
Yeah, so he pops in the model as a wide receiver 2-3. Like he's a wide receiver 2 upside prospect, but he's like considered a bust potential guy because of the nature of his prospect profile. Like in terms of the types of guys that have been in that vicinity, we're talking about Quentin Johnston last year. We're talking about Jamison Williams. We're talking about, these first round receivers that have a lot of physical tools, and that's why they're drafted in the first round, but their prospect profiles have holes to them. Brian Thomas, unlike Jamison Williams and Quentin Johnston, has a valid excuse that he played with an elite college football wide receiver in Malik Nabers. So that is the difference, in my opinion, which is why I think Thomas is a slightly better prospect than those guys and more so on the level of a Jordan Addison, a Chris Olave, a Michael Pittman Jr. in that vicinity of a prospect caliber. So for me, Brian Thomas Jr. is like, we're getting a Nico Collins archetype, except we don't have to wait 3 years for him to actually be productive. Picture like second year in the NFL, Nico Collins coming out in the NFL draft. And that's kind of what Brian Thomas Jr. represents. So you don't have that first year where he was figuring things out. He's going to come right out, hopefully, to a good landing spot like the Bengals or like the Jaguars or something like that, where he can go and be a developmental number 1 wide receiver. Right now, I believe he's a good number 2, but he could develop into a number 1. I think he's a size speed freak. He's a fluid mover. He's good after the catch. He's great downfield. The problems I had with him on film really are just rawness in terms of his football IQ and nuance. Again, you seem to think that his route running nuance was a little bit better. I didn't see the refinement that you saw, and his route tree, especially when he was asked to not run a go route or a post route or a comeback route or anything on that vertical route stem, I don't think he has a whole lot of experience running routes like that. And that's why he wasn't able to command the target share that some other first round receivers are able to command.
There's kind of an Adonai Mitchell factor in the sense that he shows up huge on some plays, and some plays, like for example, if you watch the Alabama game, the corners really had a number on him, really getting physical with him. And he didn't have, he had by far his worst game of the year. I believe he had only like 3 catches, less than 40 yards, really struggled in that game against those 2 first round corners. But what I keep coming back to is, although he has a raw route tree at this current point, he can win down the field at an elite level, given the natural gifts, given being able to high point the football, being able to come down within the end zone, 17 touchdowns in the SEC this year. But he also has that third gear that we're looking for as a yards after catch player. Get the ball in his hands in space. Let him create after the catch, man. He is an absolute fluid athlete with 4.33 speed at his size, man. I keep coming back to the fact you get a good offensive coordinator with this guy, he's going to be able to develop into one of the best receivers in the league. And he's shown more substance on a play-by-play, game-by-game basis to why he would be ranking this much over a guy like Adonai Mitchell for me, for example. So with Brian Thomas, I think he's going to be a top 20 NFL draft pick. I think the offensive coordinator that selects him, or head coach that selects him, will have the vision in mind for him. And yeah, man, like with Brian Thomas Jr., like we're talking about a guy who has the physical gifts to be there with, the AJ Greens, the Julio Jones, the freak, X wide receivers we've seen of years past dominate the NFL. The only problem, of course, is he's not refined enough to be considered and compared to those guys quite yet.
Yeah, I worry that he'll be a face planner is the only thing that I come back to. It's I think he's raw enough that when he comes to the NFL, it might be a learning curve for him, and dynasty players are not patient. However, if he does come to the NFL and training camp's all he needs to get up to speed, and he has a 800-yard, 6-touchdown rookie season, he can climb dynasty rankings quite quickly. So I don't want to miss out on Brian Thomas. There was a point in the offseason where I was going to say, let my league mates draft this guy at 109, 110. I'm going to get shares, but I'm not all in at this point in time. I'm going to get shares. I'm excited about him. I'm just going to temper my exposure and temper my expectations to the point that I don't want to miss out, but I'm also not going to be all in on the guy. So let's get into the top guys. Again, we've talked about them ad nauseum. Let's start with our number 3 consensus for both of us. Rome Odunze does everything at a high level. Honestly, he does everything at a high level. He is a great contested catch guy. He's a great route runner, despite what people say about him, how he can't separate and all this kind of stuff. He is a tremendous athlete. He ran a great agility score. He ran a great 40 for his size as well. He's a bully with the ball in his hands. Excellent hands in general too. Size, physicality, production. Again, you want to explain away the fact that he was a senior and the fact that he wasn't an early declare. He had a COVID year in there. There was a shortened season. The coaching staff was horrible 2020 and 2021. Realistically, 2022 was his sophomore year and 2023 was his junior year, given the fact that he had the COVID year in 2020. He's only 21.9 years old. He's the same age, a couple months different as Marvin Harrison Jr. So if you're not saying Marvin Harrison Jr. is too old or, just because he's an early declare, they're both 4 years out of high school. It doesn't matter which one was an early declare or not.
Yeah, it's so funny to me just because Marv's an early declare and Rome is, and like people want to act like Rome is some ancient player and Marvin Harrison Jr. is this young spry receiver when they're literally separated, like you said, by what? Rome is 21.9 at this current point. Marvin Harrison Jr. is 21.7. So they're both going to be sub 22 years old by draft night. So I don't understand why that is a common, rebuttal to what Rome did. We can just accept and acknowledge that Rome Odunze had one of the better draft eligible seasons that we've seen, like made the national championship, extremely productive. And for as much love as people show Michael Penix, I truly believe it's kind of like the cat or the mouse, the chicken or the egg factor. Like, did Michael Penix make his receivers or did the receivers make Michael Penix? I personally believe in the latter. I think Rome Odunze is a certified number 1 ex-NFL wide receiver stud. And then obviously, of course, Polk and McMillan representing number 2 wide receiver upside at the next level. With Rome Odunze, man, like, he reminds me a lot. Again, I was young when this guy came out, and obviously Go Blue, the team that beat Washington in the national championship, is the school that this guy went to. But kind of similar to what I could imagine was being said about Braylon Edwards at the time. And we saw with Braylon Edwards, had character concerns not worked into it, he really blossomed onto the scene for the Cleveland Browns. Rome Odunze, by all accounts, what I'm hearing, he sounds like a great kid. He sounds like he's got a good head on his shoulders. Like, his smarts and IQ graded as a 7 out of 7.5 for me. So definitely a smart, intelligent, cerebral football player. And when you're talking about what he brings to the table, man, if you're imagining, a Michael Pittman Jr. with better movement speed, that's the type of player I see with a guy like Rome Odunze. 9.5 in his hands, 14.5 as a route runner, gave you some wiggle after the catch. And I do think this is arguably the best press receiver not named Marvin Harrison Jr. in this entire class. Really, the way I see it, I've heard people throwing out the comps of Jamar Chase. And while I don't think he's that fluid of an athlete, if he does hit his full upside, man, I can see glimpses of Lamar in his game or Jamar in his game.
Yeah, and there's only 6 prospects that have come out since 2016 that were labeled wide receiver 1 upside guys. Devontae Smith and Rome Odunze are the only 2 that were not early declares. Like, we're talking about Justin Jefferson, Drake London, AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson, these type of dudes. For Devontae Smith and Rome Odunze to be in this company, they must have had dominant final seasons, and that's exactly what happened. Like, you could make the argument that even though Nabers and Marvin were both head to head for the Biletnikoff, like, Odunze wins the Biletnikoff 9 out of 10 seasons most of the time with the season that he had. So these 3 guys, throw them in a hat. I'm not even going to argue if you have Odunze 1 or Odunze 2. I really don't care. These guys are all superstars. Let's talk about Malik Nabers next, because he is the youngest of the 3 of these guys, has the worst size, 6 foot, 200 pounds of these 3 guys, but he is 20.7 years old, born in 2003, only 3 years removed from high school, the most explosive of the 3, the best yards after catch ability of the 3, the best agility, in my opinion, even though Rome Odunze tested very well in that area.
Athlete.
Yeah, best athlete in general, probably. I mean,
Yeah.
his numbers are outstanding from an athletic standpoint, and his like production profile combined with his numbers athletically basically put him on the same level as Ja'Marr Chase. And if you guys are curious in terms of best prospects that have ever come out in the prospect model, Ja'Marr Chase was the best prospect prior to this year. Both Malik Nabers and Marvin Harrison Jr. grade as better prospects than what Ja'Marr Chase did coming out. And the difference between Nabers and Chase is the market share production, because even though both guys played with bona fide first round receiver prospects, Brian Thomas Jr. and Justin Jefferson, respectively, Malik Nabers was the alpha. He was the clear number one in his offense. 30% target share, 31% target share this year, 3.64 yards per route run in that good of an offense with that much target competition. Led the country in this class with a 93.1 PFF receiving grade. He did everything that I asked of him back in summer scouting when I ranked him wide receiver 3, just behind Emeka Egbuka and Marvin Harrison coming into this class. I'm like, hey, if Nabers can hit his ceiling, man, he's going to end up being almost as good as Marvin. And that is literally exactly what happened.
Yeah, and I've heard people make the case that he's even better than Marvin. Now, I won't get there, but Malik Nabers, man, like we both have him with the same pro comparison. The difference is that he's a much better athlete than his pro comparison. And we're talking about Brenden Ayuk. And obviously, we've seen Brenden Ayuk develop into arguably a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL. He would probably be well within that top 5 to 8 range for me in terms of real life play. The difference is that, Brenden Ayuk, he's become the technician he is. Obviously, dog when the ball's in the air after the catch, nuance as a route runner. But the difference is like Malik Nabers is legit 4.3, 4.35 speed, whereas Brenden Ayuk was a 4.4, 4.45 speed type of guy. So if he can become Brenden Ayuk with a tenth of a second faster 40-yard dash, like we're talking about him potentially being, again, he ended up grading as one of the best prospects in the FSC prospect model of all time as a league winner. And it's hard to envision him not getting to that ceiling, to be honest. Like the only two other names other than Malik Nabers and Marvin Harrison who have made that claim are Ja'Marr Chase and CeeDee Lamb, and they are 2 of the top 3 valued receivers on the market.
Yeah, and he grades out even better than prospects like Justin Jefferson and Garrett Wilson and Drake London and Devontae Smith and these guys. Like there's virtually nothing wrong with his prospect profile. Anything that you have wrong with Malik Nabers is a film-related grievance. His contested catch ability is not the best in this class among these top 3 receivers. Concerning drops at times. Definitely doesn't really know what he's doing as a route runner yet, but he's just 20 years old. I know a lot of people have a lot of faith who study route running and receivers a little bit more in depth than we do, that he can develop everything that he needs to develop. Just picture Jetpack Brenden Ayuk as a second-year pro coming out of college, and that's basically what we have out of Malik Nabers here. So very exciting prospect. Definitely. If you guys have the 104 and 105 in your class, just thank your lucky stars you tanked this year instead of last year when the 104, 105, still good prospects you would have gotten. But Malik Nabers, man, holy cow, is this guy an excellent prospect at wide receiver. So final guy, of course, no surprise to anybody, Marvin Harrison Jr. is our wide receiver 1 for both of us. My comp for him is Larry Fitzgerald, and the reason my comp for him is Larry Fitzgerald is because he literally does everything at an extremely high level and has virtually no flaws to his game, just like Larry Fitzgerald did. There were some drops here and there. Maybe he's not special after the catch like Malik Nabers is. That's literally where it starts and ends with his flaws, because he's an elite route runner. He's a prototype X receiver. He is a very, very good athlete. Everybody thinks this guy doesn't have 4.4 speed. I promise you he would have probably cracked 4.3s had he run at the NFL Scouting Combine. He is a route running savant. His father is in the Hall of Fame, and it is no surprise when you watch him run routes. He has an A+ analytical profile, the single best FSC prospect model, wide receiver prospect that has ever existed. If you can point me to a better prospect since 2016, I challenge you to do so, because Ja'Marr Chase was previously, like I said, the leader of this prospect model. Marvin Harrison's market share numbers eviscerate Ja'Marr Chase's, and not to mention he has better size and just outstanding film. There's nothing I can poke holes in with Marvin Harrison Jr. I genuinely believe this duo of wide receivers, Marvin and Malik Nabers, and again, even throwing Odunze in here is just absolutely laughable how good this wide receiver class is. This is Julio Jones, AJ Green 2.0.
Yeah, 100%. On top of if you added like a Braylon Edwards type of prospect in there with Rome Odunze. It's funny when you look at the Marvin Harrison Jr. prospect profile and you look at the card that we have for him. And again, if you guys are on Flock Fantasy, you will have access to that. The weakness that he has is quite literally some drops and nothing else. When you're talking about my comp for him is AJ Green. If you added a tenth of a second faster than what AJ Green ran at the combine with a 4.50, If you added maybe 5 inches on the vert, AJ Green jumped 34.5. I think Marv would probably be in the 38.5, 39 area if he tested. And if you added more production, you would get Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, we are talking about an objectively better version of what AJ Green was as a prospect. And AJ Green peaked as a top 3 to 5 wide receiver in the NFL. That just shows you how special Marvin Harrison Jr. is. It's like if you took Marvin Harrison Sr. and plugged it into a 6'3", 210-pound frame, you would get Marvin Harrison Jr. It's actually unbelievable how good this guy is. And that is coming from a Michigan fan, talking about an Ohio State player as being arguably one of the best prospects I have ever witnessed. Not even talking about wide receiver, talking about overall period, up there with Andrew Luck, up there with Trevor Lawrence, up there with some of the best defensive players we have seen come out in recent years. Marvin Harrison Jr. may just be number 1 overall.
Yeah, it's funny, too, because I know what's going to happen next year. Somebody's going to pretend like Marvin was this unbelievable generational prospect, even though there's people that are downgrading him now. It's like, why can't we, in the moment, realize that this guy is the best prospect we've ever seen before he ever plays an NFL snap? Because people did this with Chase, too. People said Chase was this, flawed prospect who couldn't separate. And then as soon as he played his rookie season, they're like, nobody's been better than Chase. Chase had no problems with him. And it's like, you guys are using revisionist history on these prospects. It's like, that's what the prospect model is for. It's supposed to tell us, generally speaking, who's the best prospect we've seen before we actually get them to the NFL. And that's why the prospect model loves Marvin Harrison and Malik Nabers this much in this class. So again, long video. Hopefully you guys made it to the end of this video because we had a lot of fun breaking down this wide receiver class. We had to spend time on these guys. This class is that deep. Every single player we talked about in this class, we would spend a top 4-round NFL draft pick on. Even Johnny Wilson, even Jacob Cowing, the guys that we talked about at the very beginning of this video, are all very, very solid wide receiver prospects. If your dynasty rookie drafts have 48 picks in them, there should be 25, 30 receivers off the board. Like, that's just how good this class is relative to the running back position, relative to the tight end position. And even after the top 6 quarterbacks, it is pretty much wide receivers and nothing else for the rest of this class. So we are going to cover running backs tomorrow. I'm sure you guys will be interested in that because there's a lot of debate in that class. There's not a lot of consensus at that position. And then we will cover quarterbacks, top 5, top 6 quarterbacks, top 5 tight ends on Wednesday. And then, of course, the NFL draft is just 3 days away. We will be live on Thursday and Friday and Saturday for the NFL draft. Going to be a ton of fun. So if you enjoyed this video, if you made it all the way to the end, comment down below who your favorite discussion was on this wide receiver video. Who did you like the most that we were talking about in terms of the back and forth? Comment that down below. And of course, if you want our draft guide, if you want everything that you could need to dominate your dynasty rookie draft, head on over to flockfantasy.com and use the promo code FSE when you sign up. And you'll get all of our draft guides. You'll get our draft guide. You get all the other draft guides of the other creators on the site. You'll get our prospect rankings, our dynasty 1 quarterback, super flex, trade value chart, top 250 rankings for dynasty. And of course, we are running a special promotion right now too. When you sign up over on Underdog Fantasy, which Best Ball Mania 5 drafts will be opening shortly after the NFL draft, and you use the promo code FSE when you sign up, you'll get 100% back up to $100 on a $10 deposit. That's all you have to deposit, and you will get our draft guide for free. You will get our film breakdowns for free. You won't actually get it until after the NFL draft because we got to make some tweaks, some final tweaks to the draft guide before we send it over to you. But you will get everything you'll need for your dynasty rookie draft, the film breakdowns and the draft guide for free by using our promo code FSE on Underdog Fantasy. So around the time of, May 1st-ish is when you'll actually get access to that. But definitely, if you have not taken the leap to sign up over on Underdog yet, this is the best time to do so because you'll get ready for your dynasty drafts in the process and you can take advantage of some of the values that you're going to get early on in Best Ball Mania 5. So if that interests you, that'll be linked down below in the description as well as in the pinned comment. But with that being said, peace out and we'll talk to you soon.